The key that didn't belong to me. The strange part is, nothing dramatic happened the day my key vanished. No chase, no accident, no moment of panic. I reached into my jacket outside my building on Polk Avenue, expecting the familiar weight of metal, and felt nothing but fabric. I emptied every pocket, turned my bag inside out, even crouched by the curb to check the gutter. After 20 stressful minutes, I accepted the truth. The key had slipped into some corner of the world I'd never find. Gus Mercado, the building manager, was leaning behind the front desk when I walked in. An older man with wrists thick from years of fixing things tenants didn't know how to break. He didn't look surprised when I explained, only tired, as if he'd heard the same confession from a dozen tenants that week. He led me into his cramped office, a room lined with metal hooks and aging labels, everything smelling faintly of grease and paper that had absorbed too many summers. Gus studied the rows of keys like a librarian deciding which book belonged to whom. And then something strange happened. For the briefest blink, I saw my key hanging among the others. Same blue cap, same scrape on the brass head where I'd dropped it on concrete once. But when I blinked again, the hook was empty, and Gus was turning toward me with another key. "Don't stress," he said, pressing it into my hand. "Everyone loses one eventually. Here's the spare." It looked exactly like the original. Same weight, same wear, same everything. I went upstairs, slipped the key into the lock, and it slid open like it had been made for that door alone. The familiar smell of the apartment, old carpet, leftover warmth from the vanilla candle, wrapped around me. For a moment, I felt silly for how worked up I'd been. That was in September. By October, I wished I'd trusted that first spark of unease. It started on a Thursday night, 3 weeks later. I came home after another draining shift at the law firm downtown, the kind of workplace where you're always drowning in files no matter how fast you swim. It was after 10 when I finally reached my door. The deadbolt caught nothing unusual. It sometimes needed a wiggle. But the second the lock clicked open, a chill ran through me. The apartment wasn't chaotic. Nothing was smashed or stolen. But small things, intimate things, were wrong. The mug I'd left on the counter that morning, handle pointed left the way I always positioned it, wasn't there. It sat instead in the dish rack, washed clean. The blanket on the couch wasn't draped lazily where I tossed it. It had been folded with care and tucked perfectly along the edge. The bathroom door, always left slightly open so steam wouldn't cling to the room, was pulled shut. I froze in the doorway, my hand still gripping the knob, my pulse thudding in my ears. Every instinct tried to piece the moment together, but the conclusions kept twisting into something my mind refused to accept. And the very first thought that pushed through was one I'm still ashamed to admit. My first instinct was to blame myself. Maybe I had washed that mug before heading out. Maybe I'd been more exhausted lately than I wanted to admit. Work had been eating at me, and sleep came in thin, broken stretches. But even with all that, I knew one thing with absolute, bone-deep certainty. I never refold blankets. Not in my home, not for myself, not ever. That small, impossible detail snapped something awake in me, some old childhood awareness that used to make me check closet doors before bed. I walked through every room slowly, my senses stretched tight. Nothing else seemed touched. My laptop was exactly where I'd left it, my wallet still in my jacket pocket. The newly issued key sat beside it. All the windows were sealed from the inside. I stepped back into the hallway before pulling out my phone. Being inside the apartment while explaining what I'd found felt wrong. like breathing in someone else's exhale. I called Gus and tried to describe the absence of anything concrete, the way normal objects were suddenly wrong. He didn't sound startled. If anything, he sounded prepared. "I'll come up," he said. 10 minutes later, he arrived, carrying the smell of cigars and laundry soap with him. He locked and unlocked the door a few times, checked every window latch, tapped the frames like he was listening for secrets in the wood. When he finally straightened up, he gave a long sigh. "Everything's solid," he said. "You're sure nothing's missing?" "I'm sure. No one else has a copy. No old partner, no family. Just me." He rubbed the side of his face, thinking. "Sometimes long hours mess with your head," he said gently. "I've seen tenants swear someone came in, only to find out later they just misremembered. Stress does that." I didn't want to argue, so I let the silence between us do the work. "Look," he continued, "if it'll help, I can change the locks tomorrow." I told him I'd think about it. After he left, I sat down on the carefully folded blanket, someone else's neatness beneath me, and tried to rewind my morning like a film. Had I washed the mug without noticing? Had I folded the blanket last night and forgotten? I knew how memory worked. I dealt with people's fractured recollections every day at the firm. Memory is a story we perform for ourselves, a thing that can shift without warning. So I fed myself the easy explanations. You're tired, you're distracted, you're imagining patterns where none exist. And for a moment, I almost believed them. Then Monday arrived, 3 days later. I opened my apartment door and stopped dead. The bookshelf was different, not empty, not rearranged into total chaos, but the messy, nonsensical pattern I'd lived with for years. The piles, the tilted stacks, the way certain books leaned because I liked them that way was gone. Everything had been lined up, straightened, organized into rows I'd never seen before, as if someone had decided my private disorder needed correction. It felt like something inside me was unraveling thread by thread. Every time I tried to anchor myself to what I knew, doubt pushed in like water through cracked cement. I started photographing every room before leaving for work, my cluttered desk, the crooked lamp, the leaning towers of books, anything that might help me prove to myself that things were being altered. But at night, staring at those photos, the certainty dissolved. Had the lamp always tilted that way? Were those books truly stacked like that? Or was I remembering a version that had never existed? My own evidence wasn't reassuring me. It was betraying me. By Saturday, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into the Northern Division station on Balboa, palms sweating, rehearsing what I would say. The officer who called me over, a young woman named Delgado, looked like she'd already lived a whole day before noon. She listened while I described the break-ins, my voice flat but trembling around the edges. "And nothing's gone missing?" she asked. "No. No broken locks, no scratches around the latch. No. No threats, no messages, no vandalism." I shook my head. "So what exactly is happening?" "Someone is entering my apartment," I said, "and touching my things. That's still a crime." She didn't argue. She wrote everything down neatly, but her expression softened in a way I recognized too well. Professional concern mixed with quiet disbelief. I could feel her estimating risk, deciding where my incident fit on the priority list. She handed me an incident number and suggested, kindly, that I might want to consider a home camera system. She also mentioned, softly enough that I almost pretended not to hear it, that if stress was affecting me, There were places I could talk to someone. I thanked her and left. That afternoon, I bought 2 small wireless cameras, the kind that send footage straight to your phone. I put one above the front door, angled perfectly toward the entryway, and the second one facing the living room. That night I lay in bed watching both feeds like a person staring at a storm radar, waiting for the red blotch to appear. But the screens remained still, silent, empty. The next day changed everything. When I unlocked the apartment after work, I looked immediately at the camera in the living room. It wasn't pointed where I'd left it. It had turned, only slightly, maybe 10 degrees, but enough that its view now missed the bookshelf and instead captured nothing but a blank patch of wall. My heart began to pound before I even checked the footage. But when I played the recording back, the timeline was spotless. No blips, no dark frames, no shadow crossing the lens. Hours of untouched quiet. According to the camera, no one had been there. But the angle was undeniably different. I took the camera down and tested the joint. It was firm, so tight I had to use both hands to shift it. There was no way vibrations had nudged it. No way it had moved on its own. Someone had entered the apartment, found the camera, and deliberately repositioned it. Not to break it, not to steal it, but to let me see what they'd done. A message delivered without a single word. That night, I packed whatever I could fit into a duffel. I didn't bother folding anything. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I drove across the city until the streetlights thinned out and checked into a nameless motel on the edge of Mission, desperate for distance from the place that no longer felt like mine. I ended up in a motel out in Mission Valley, a beige, forgettable building that seemed designed for people who needed somewhere temporary to fall apart. It was the kind of place you paid for week by week, where the hallways smelled like stale air and resignation. I told myself I needed space to think. That distance would help me make rational decisions. But the truth was simpler. I needed a room where I could close my eyes without wondering who might already be inside. $49 a night bought me that illusion. For 3 nights, I lived out of a duffel bag, eating vending machine snacks and pretending the humming air conditioner was comforting. On the 3rd night, I finally worked up the nerve to call Gus. "I need all the locks changed," I said. "Every single one." He didn't ask why, not a single question. That silence unsettled me. What did he already suspect? What had he seen? He said he'd handle it first thing Monday morning. When Monday arrived, I worked from the motel's scratched wooden desk, the roar of Interstate 8 bleeding through the paper-thin window. Just after lunch, Gus called. "They're all replaced," he said. "New deadbolt, new handle, new keys. And yes, you're the only person with copies. Are you sure none of the old keys fit anymore?" "Positive. I tested them myself." For the first time in weeks, something inside my chest untensed, like a fist finally unclenching. I thanked him over and over, probably sounding more desperate than grateful. He told me to stop by his office whenever I was ready to pick up the keys. I went at sunset, when the San Diego sky glows so warmly it feels unreal. Gus handed me 2 shiny brass keys with red plastic caps, logging the change in his ledger with steady hands. The small office felt exactly the same, walls crowded with keys, the air thick with old paper and machine oil. But for the first time, it didn't feel threatening. It felt like sanctuary. He studied me for a moment. "You doing all right?" I must have looked like a ghost, unshaven, hollow, jittering with leftover fear. I think I will be," I said. Burdened with my motel bag, clutching the new keys like talismans, I climbed the stairs to 3B. The key slipped into the lock and turned with a soft, perfect click. When I pushed the door open, I froze. Everything was exactly as I'd left it 4 days earlier. The bed messy, dishes scattered in the sink. The comforting, familiar chaos I understood. The sight of it broke something open in me, not dramatically, no sobbing or collapsing, just quiet tears streaming down my face while I stood in the doorway. It felt like coming home to myself. That night I slept, really slept. Not the hyper-aware drifting I'd been doing, actual rest. I woke up the next morning feeling almost like someone with a life again. I made coffee. I went to work. I started imagining normal things, cleaning the apartment, calling my sister, maybe going back to the gym. For the first time in a long time, the day felt ordinary. I got home around 7. The red-capped key turned easily in the brand new lock. I pushed the door open, stepped inside, and everything was wrong. Not as the lamp moved, wrong. Not was that book always there, wrong. But wrong in a way that ripped all the air out of my lungs. The furniture stopped me cold. It wasn't mine. None of it was mine. Where my soft gray couch should have been, a stiff brown leather sofa sat like a stranger in my living room. The sleek glass table I'd bought secondhand was gone, replaced by a heavy, dark wooden slab that looked like it belonged in a different decade. The tall bookshelf I'd dragged up 3 flights of stairs myself had vanished, swapped for a shorter, wider one packed with books I'd never opened, never owned, never even seen. The walls, once covered with prints I'd collected over years, now displayed bland beach scenes, the kind hotels frame out of obligation. And the smell wasn't home. It was sharp and sterile, a chemical brightness that stung my nostrils. For a long moment, I couldn't make my body move. It was as if my mind struck a hard boundary it couldn't cross, refusing to make sense of what my eyes insisted was real. This wasn't my life. This wasn't my history. But the key had turned, the lock had yielded, the door had opened. And the number, 3B, was the same number I'd lived behind for 2 years. I stepped back out into the hallway, closing the door quietly as if the wrongness inside it might leak out. I stared at the metal numbers again. 3B perfectly normal, perfectly familiar. I glanced around. The elevator stood to my right. The stairwell to my left. The irregular brown stain on the ceiling still looked vaguely like the state of Idaho. Everything matched my building. Everything except the apartment itself. My hands trembled as I slid the key into the lock again. Another smooth turn. Another click. Another doorway opening onto a life I didn't recognize. I fumbled for my phone, breath tight and shallow, and called Gus. 6 rings, voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. The hallway seemed to pulse around me, my heart beat loud in my ears. There had to be a mistake. There had to be some rational pathway through this nightmare. I forced myself back inside. The kitchen was a stranger's kitchen, white cabinets, a spotless modern fridge, utensils arranged with someone else's sense of order. The bathroom held neatly folded towels and a lineup of toiletries that didn't belong to me. The scents were masculine and sharp. The razor and shaving cream sat exactly where the cologne's chemical clean scent drifted toward the hallway. In the bedroom, the bed looked like it had been made by someone trained to fold corners with military precision. The closet held men's clothes, mediums, all of them, when I'd always worn a large. Button-downs, slacks, suits in dry cleaning bags. On the nightstand, a framed photograph showed a smiling man on a beach, sand at his feet, arms around an older couple. Parents, maybe. A life captured in a still image. A life that wasn't mine. A life I was standing in. Then a sound tore through the apartment. A metallic scrape, familiar and terrifying. A key turning in the lock. The sound hit me like a jolt of electricity. My body reacted before my mind did. I darted across the bedroom, slipped inside the closet, and pulled the door almost shut behind me. Darkness swallowed me. My heart pounded so violently I felt it in my throat, each beat echoing like a drum against the thin wooden door. Someone was home, and I was not supposed to be there. Through the narrow crack in the closet door, I watched a stranger walk into the bedroom, except he wasn't a stranger. He was the man from the photograph. Early 30s, neatly dressed, looking like he just clocked out from a corporate office. He loosened his tie, popped open the top button of his shirt, moving with the sort of casual confidence people only have in their own homes. Then he froze. His hands stopped mid-motion. His shoulders pulled tight. He tilted his head, listening to something I couldn't hear. I didn't know what he sensed, but it made the hairs on my arms rise. Slowly, his eyes swept the room. They glided past the closet, then drifted back. He stared at the door at me for what felt like a lifetime. I forced myself not to breathe, chest screaming for air. At last, he turned toward the nightstand. He opened the drawer, and when his hand came back up, he wasn't holding a wallet or a phone. It was a knife. Not the flimsy kitchen kind. A real one, heavy, purpose-built. His grip tightened around it as he stepped toward the closet, quiet and controlled, like someone trained to move that way. In those few seconds, my mind raced. I'm going to die in a stranger's closet. I should have called the police. Why did I trust Gus? Why did the key work? How did I end up here? My sister, my coworkers, all the unfinished pieces of my life they'd never understand. The closet door swung open. We locked eyes, two men in the same room, both certain it belonged to them. He had a weapon. I had nothing, just fear, exhaustion, and a key that suddenly felt cursed. "Who are you?" he asked. His voice was steady, but his knuckles whitened around the blade. "How did you get in here?" "I live here," I said, and as the words left my mouth, I heard how deranged they sounded. "This is my apartment, 3B. His expression didn't soften. "I've lived in 3B for 4 years. He didn't blink. "Who gave you a key?" "Gus, the building manager. He just changed my locks today, gave me the new set." A flicker passed through his eyes, something like recognition, like the beginning of the same impossible thought forming in my own mind. But he shut it down with a hard shake of his head. No, you broke in, you copied a key, or you picked the lock or something." His voice cracked with anger, fear, denial. "This is my apartment, mine. Leave now or I'm calling the police." "I have a key that works," I said quietly. "If your locks changed 2 days ago, why could I still get in? Why did nothing stop me?" His jaw clenched. "Maybe you're with the locksmith, maybe you're trying to." His voice trailed off, swallowed by something even he couldn't explain. The realization neither of us wanted was standing right between us, and neither of us knew what came next. He kept the blade up, chest rising and falling too fast, eyes locked on me like I might vanish if he blinked. "Your license," he said, voice tight. I moved slowly, fingers trembling as I took out my wallet and held the card toward him. He snatched a look, then his face drained of color. No, that can't be real. That has to be fake. His voice wavered, cracking at the edges. There's no way you have this address. No way. Then check yours, I said softly. With his free hand, he dug into his pocket, fumbling for his wallet without ever lowering the knife. We held them side by side. 2 licenses, same address, same unit, 2 different men, 2 different identities, both valid. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. This isn't possible. The confidence he'd clung to earlier had vanished. I'm losing it. I'm actually losing it. You're not real. I'm hallucinating. I'm real, I said, keeping my voice low, steady. And so are you. But something impossible is happening, and we're both standing in the middle of it. He swallowed hard, breathing unevenly. I could almost see the theory spinning behind his eyes. Mental break, scam, elaborate prank, anything to avoid the truth tightening around us both. I understood. I tried those explanations myself every time reality slipped sideways. But eventually, you run out of excuses. What's your name? I asked. He hesitated like the question itself hurt. Owen Shepherd. I'm Lyle Camden, and this is apartment 3B, 3rd floor, 4782 Polk Avenue. Yes, he whispered. I've been here for 4 years. I've been here for 2. The knife dipped an inch, not lower, just less aimed at my heart. We stared at each other across the bed that somehow belonged to both of us, in a room that felt like it had been split down the middle by some invisible fault line. This isn't happening, Owen murmured. It can't be. I wish that were true, I said, but here we are. We stood there breathing the same air, 2 strangers forced into the same impossible truth. 2 lives overlapping where they never should have. Step out of the closet, he said finally. I moved slowly, hands raised to keep him calm, inching into the room like any sudden movement might shatter the fragile truce forming between us. We ended up on opposite sides of the bed, 2 wary animals trapped in the same cage. Your key, he said. I lifted the ring, showing him the red-topped key. He reached into his pocket and showed me his, blue-topped, identical to the one I'd lost weeks ago. My first key disappeared about 6 weeks back, he said. Gus had to give me another. 6 weeks ago, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. That's when my things started shifting around. First small stuff, then whole shelves. I thought I was losing my mind. His eyes widened. I thought that too. I'd come home and everything would be tidied, rearranged. I blamed stress, or I don't know, sleepwalking. I changed my locks yesterday, I said quietly. New keys this morning. I changed mine 2 days ago. He lowered the knife another inch, confusion outweighing fear now. But your key still opens the door. And yours opens mine. We stood there, 2 men connected by a mystery we never asked for, both convinced we were being intruded on, both realizing we were each other's intruder, victims and suspects at the same time, trapped in the same impossible overlap. I saw something shift in Owen's eyes, a dawning horror, yes, but also recognition, as if he was finally thinking the same thought I had been trying not to consider. He was clearly running through the same mental maze I was, desperate to land on a normal, harmless explanation. Something simple, something human, anything that didn't involve the floor dropping out from under reality. There has to be another 3B, Owen muttered, almost pleading with the air. There isn't, I said. I've lived in this building long enough, only one. But we're both in it, he whispered. So how? You tell me, I said. Your key works. Mine does too. And I've woken up in your apartment more nights than I can count. The truth slammed into both of us at the same time. His shoulders jerked. I felt the same sickening lurch in my stomach. God, Owen breathed, voice cracking. I've been inside your home. And I've been inside yours, I said, my throat tightening. Every day you thought someone was breaking in, that was me. And every time I thought my place was rearranging itself, that was you. His expression collapsed into something raw: shame, fear, bewilderment, all tangled together. I reorganized your books, he admitted softly. I couldn't help it. The mess made my skin crawl. It felt wrong. I thought I was protecting my place. I noticed, I said quietly, but I didn't touch anything in yours. I was too scared to. He rubbed his forehead, eyes unfocused. I've been living in what I thought was my bedroom, my bed, my space, but it was yours, and you were doing the same thing for weeks. We stared at the bed sitting between us, his bed, my bed, both neither. And for a moment that simple piece of furniture looked like a crime scene, not of violence, but of something more intimate, more violating. We hadn't touched each other, but we had trespassed deeper than strangers ever should, into each other's routines, each other's private worlds, the places where a person keeps the pieces that make them them. I feel like I'm coming apart, Owen whispered. Yeah, I said, me too. He drew a long, shaky breath. We need answers. Gus will know what's going on. He has to. I tried calling. He didn't pick up. Then we're going to find him in person. We walked side by side, but not too close, close enough to be a team, far enough to remind each other we were still strangers. The hallway looked exactly as it always did. Same lights, same carpet, same faint hum from the exit sign. Nothing cracked or distorted to match the nightmare we'd stepped into. We took the elevator down together. The doors slid open as though nothing was wrong. Gus's office was dark. The blinds drawn, the desk empty, a sloppy handwritten note taped to the glass. Out of office, back Wednesday. Owen stared at the sign like it personally betrayed him. He was here, earlier today. He handed me my keys. He gave me mine this afternoon, I said. Owen's eyes snapped to mine. We didn't need to say it out loud. He had been here, just not in the same version of today. A cold, nauseating understanding rippled through us both. This is wrong, Owen said quietly. Really, really wrong. I nodded. We should call the police. He let out a short, humorless laugh, more of a sob than anything. And tell them what? That one apartment somehow holds two separate lives, that the locks work in ways they should, that we're sharing a home without ever meeting until tonight. His eyes were wide, frantic, hunted. They'll think we're crazy, he said, or lying or dangerous. He wasn't wrong. And the worst part, I wasn't sure the police could help, even if they believed us. Owen stared at me like I'd suggested something grotesque. His jaw tight, his grip whitening around the knife he still hadn't quite put down. You want us to share an apartment that isn't even one apartment, he said, barely above a whisper. A space that changes depending on which of us opens the door. A place we've been crossing into without even knowing. It's not that I want to, I said. It's that there's nowhere else for either of us to go. He pressed the heel of his hand into his eyes as if trying to push back a migraine, or maybe the entire situation crushing him. I can't live like this. I can't sleep in a bedroom that isn't just mine. I can't exist in a place that shifts under my feet. You think I can? I asked quietly. But this is the only 3B either of us have ever had, and apparently we both belong here. He leaned against the hallway wall, sliding down until he was sitting on the carpet, staring at nothing. His face was pale, not with fear exactly, but with the shock of having the foundation of his life pulled out from under him. We went to the police, he said bitterly. Separately, together, and nobody believed a word. And now we know why. They can't help. They can't intervene in something that shouldn't exist. We need order, I said softly. Structure, something predictable even if the place is. Owen laughed, one short, broken sound. So we write rules for an apartment that's basically a glitch in reality. We write rules for us, I corrected, until we understand what the hell is going on. He stared at my face for a long time, and I could see him trying to decide whether I was part of the problem or the only person he had left to trust. Fine, he said finally, pushing himself to his feet. Rules, agreements, something to stop us from living in each other's lives without knowing it. I nodded. We can start simple, privacy, boundaries, times we enter, times we avoid the space, maybe even a shared calendar. He rubbed a hand over his face again. God, how did my life turn into this? Mine too, I said. We stood there together in the hallway, facing the single door marked 3B, a door that led to 2 different apartments, depending on who turned the key. A door that recognized us in ways no door should. This place isn't just unstable, Owen whispered. It's choosing. I swallowed, or reacting. To what? I don't know. He stared at the brass numbers on the door, his voice hollow. What if the building manager knows? What if Gus is connected to it somehow? You saw it. He changed your locks. He changed mine. Same job, different days. Same person, different versions. I nodded. He must know something, or he's part of it, or he's stuck in it the way we are. Owen shook his head. If that's true, then we need more than rules. We need answers. We'll get them, I said, when he comes back Wednesday. Owen's eyes flickered to mine, and until then. I exhaled, feeling the weight of the impossible pressing down on both of us. Until then, I said quietly, we survive this together, one step at a time. He didn't argue. For the first time all night, that scared me more than anything else. I'll never forget the night Owen, and I realized the truth. The apartment we lived in wasn't just strange, it was split. 2 versions stacked on top of each other, like mismatched reflections. Both real, both occupied, both claiming the same square of space. And we were trapped inside it. When I asked him if he could simply move out, disappear, start fresh somewhere else, he didn't answer. He just stared at the door, our door, holding the knife loosely at his side, like he wasn't sure whether to defend himself or carve reality open to see what was underneath it. We both knew the truth. Neither of us had anywhere to run. What if this wasn't an apartment problem? What if this was a world problem? What if the walls around us had been splitting for years, and we'd only now stepped into the fracture? We stood together in that too bright hallway, and for the first time, the panic softened into something colder, acceptance. We needed order, structure, rules. Owen went into his version of the bedroom and came back with a notebook, sleek black leather, neat pages, the kind of thing someone buys when they expect to stay sane. His handwriting looked like an architect, sharp, measured, almost painfully tidy. He wrote our first law. We alternate days. Odd days belong to me. Even days belong to him. Second rule: no entering without warning. A text first, a knock second, respect the space. Third rule: no touching anything that isn't undeniably yours. Not a mug, not a book, not a blanket. It felt childish, almost laughable. Two grown men creating a custody agreement for a home that didn't belong to either of us alone. But the rules calmed us. They made a horrifying situation feel almost manageable. For a little while. On the third day, I walked in with my key, my day, and froze. Owen was already there, sitting on the couch that only existed in my version of the apartment. He jumped up like he'd seen a ghost. "It's the 15th, he said. "Even day, my turn." "No," I said, pulling out my phone. "Odd day, my turn." We held our screens side by side. Both read, Tuesday, October 15th. But one of us lived in an October where 15 was even. The other lived in an October where 15 was odd. The rules died right there in our hands. After that, the overlap grew worse. Sometimes I'd walk into the kitchen to brew coffee and find Owen at his stove, sautéing vegetables on a burner that didn't exist in my version of the room. He wasn't a hallucination. He wasn't transparent. He was solid, just solid elsewhere. Once we passed each other in the hallway, shoulder brushing shoulder, and both of us flinched because the contact felt wrong. Too cold, too real, too impossible. A home is supposed to be a single place. A sanctuary. A boundary. Ours became a palimpsest. Layer over layer over layer. Two lives pressed together until they bled through each other. My books started turning up in stacks I didn't make. His shirts showed up folded in my laundry basket. Two sets of toiletries gathered around the sink, like they were having a quiet argument about who had the right to exist. It was no longer clear which objects belonged to who, or which reality belonged to who. And worst of all, it was getting harder to tell whether our worlds were drifting farther apart or sliding closer together. The night stopped having clear edges after a while. There was no more your side and my side. No more pretending we could hold this thing together with rules scribbled in a notebook. We gave up on separating our lives because the apartment itself refused to stay divided. Instead, we slipped into a strange rhythm. Two men living beside each other without ever fully sharing the same world. It felt like existing next to an echo of myself. I'd hear Owen moving through his version of the space, footsteps that were slightly out of sync with mine, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me but pulsed through the same walls. And then the changes started. Small things at first. I'd open the fridge and stare at the carton of eggs, trying to remember if I bought them, or if he did. I'd reach for a jacket and realize I wasn't sure if it was mine or just bleeding through from his reality. My memories tangled with his, until the line between us thinned like old film burning at the edges. Sometimes, without realizing it, I'd think in plural. We should run to the store. We already cleaned the kitchen. Then I'd catch myself. There was no we. Just two men dissolving into each other's routines. One night we both ended up in the living room at the same time. Two couches, two bodies, occupying one space in ways that should have been impossible. Owen looked tired, translucent almost, like the apartment was wearing him down grain by grain. "I've been dreaming your life," he said quietly. He listed details he had no right to know. My sister's laugh, the way my boss taps his pen when he's annoyed, the exact crack on the stairwell near the third floor. His dreams were becoming my memories, and mine were seeping into him. Our realities weren't just overlapping anymore, they were merging. "I don't know who I am now," he whispered. "Sometimes the face in the mirror isn't mine. Sometimes it's yours. Sometimes it's no one." I didn't tell him that I'd seen the same thing. That some mornings I stared into the bathroom mirror and felt like I was looking at a stranger wearing a version of me that didn't quite fit. We weren't people sharing an apartment anymore. We were something thinner, lighter, like reflections that had slipped free from the glass. And then there was Gus, or the absence of him. His office door stayed locked, but the deeper we dug, the more the world insisted he'd never been there at all. His name meant nothing to the tenants. His phone was dead. His online trail vanished like it had never existed. When we shined our flashlights through the office window, the room looked untouched. No paperwork, no keys, no trace of the man who'd once lectured us about rent and repairs. The emptiness made my skin crawl. I started to believe Gus wasn't a person at all, but something the building created, a messenger meant to usher us from one reality into the next, a guide who disappeared the moment his purpose was fulfilled. Owen said I was losing it. Then a moment later, he admitted he'd thought the same thing. We were unraveling at the same pace, falling apart together, and in a strange way, that shared collapse felt like the only steady thing we had left. Meanwhile, the rest of the tenants moved through the halls like nothing was wrong. Or maybe they did know, but they'd already carved out their own silent agreements with the building. Maybe every apartment hid layers of people stacked on top of one another, each living a slightly different branch of the same life, never fully aware of the others drifting just inches away. Maybe we were just the first ones who looked too closely. The longer it went on, the more the building felt like a stack of translucent pages, layers of existence laid one over another, each thin enough to see through, but just solid enough to trip over. Maybe the whole place had always been this way. Maybe everyone else was drifting too, but only Owen and I were unlucky, or aware, enough to notice. Work became impossible to track. Some mornings I'd swear I'd called in sick, only to find emails I didn't remember sending. Other mornings I'd look up and realize I was already at my desk, typing away in fluorescent silence, even though I clearly remembered never leaving my bed. Owen was the same. He told me he'd quit. Yet sometimes I'd hear the front door close and there he'd be in the hallway, dressed for the office, moving like he was following a script written in a version of him I didn't have access to. Time frayed. Days repeated, jumped, folded back on themselves. There were mornings when I woke up certain it was Thursday only to have the clocks insist it was Monday again. Sometimes Owen and I were synced. Sometimes he'd greet me like he hadn't seen me in days, even though I'd swear we'd had breakfast together an hour earlier. We tried to hold onto something resembling continuity. We left notes, short little messages stuck to the fridge like life preservers. Bought groceries on Tuesday. Fixed the leak again. Saw you asleep on the couch. You looked calm. The notes multiplied until the refrigerator was coated in them, a paper skin documenting 2 lives that no longer ran in straight lines. Reading them felt like flipping through someone else's diary while recognizing your own handwriting inside it. Then stranger things crept in. I'd come to in the middle of cooking, pan hot, onions already chopped, my hands moving with a purpose I didn't remember deciding on. Or I'd be halfway through a show on TV that I had no memory of choosing, but the emotional weight of the episode sat heavy in my chest as if I'd lived every second of it. It dawned on me that these weren't my choices at all. These were Owen's moments seeping into my consciousness, or mine blending into his. We weren't just sharing a space anymore. We were sharing intentions, impulses, maybe even pieces of identity. I should have been terrified. Anybody would be. But fear requires a solid center, someone stable to protect. And whatever I had been was already unraveling. What I felt instead was a slow surrender, a soft willingness to stop fighting the current and let the overlapping worlds decide what we were becoming. One night, if night still meant anything, I opened my eyes and found Owen lying beside me. Not hazy, not half there, solid, breathing, as real as he'd been the day we first saw each other standing in the mirrored doorway between our two versions of the same home. I stared at him for a long while, my accidental roommate, my echo, my reflection, and in the dim light, his features blurred into mine until I couldn't tell where he ended and I began. I blinked. He was gone. Or maybe he was. Maybe he was still there, just shifted one layer to the left or right, sleeping in the same bed in his version of the room. The two scenes stacked like ghost images that didn't always align. The apartment has changed again. It doesn't feel like a place I inhabit anymore. It feels like something that's wearing us, using our thoughts as its bloodstream, our memories as its structure. The walls breathe. The floor warps. Yesterday the kitchen was behind the living room. Today the door opens into something that looks like the hallway, but hums quietly like it's thinking. Owen and I barely speak out loud now. Or maybe we speak constantly in the space that stretches between our overlapping minds. Hard to tell. He's less distinct these days, less a person I live beside and more a presence that moves when I move, dreams when I dream. Sometimes I wonder if either of us are separate anymore, or if the building finally finished what it started. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. The question hangs there, soft, trembling, impossible to pin down, because it no longer belongs to just one of us. It drifts in the air like a loose thread pulled from the fabric of a life that used to feel whole. Some days I step outside just to remind myself the world still looks the way it used to. Cars honking, kids laughing, the sun glinting off windshields, people moving like they belong to a single version of themselves. But the longer I stand there watching them, the more foreign it feels, as if I'm observing a life I must have lived once, in some distant timeline that doesn't quite sync with this one anymore. And every time, without fail, I end up back here. Back in the apartment that folds and refolds its rooms like it's shuffling possibilities. Back in the place where hallways shift when you're not looking, and the windows face directions that don't exist on any map. Back in the only space that still recognizes me, even if it no longer recognizes me as one person. Gus's office is still locked. The taped sign still promises he'll return Wednesday, but Wednesday either never shows up, or it arrives only to dissolve into another day before the hour is through. Sometimes I think he's still here somewhere, tuning the building like an instrument in a layer we can't reach. Other times I think he was never a person at all, just a function the building needed until it didn't. Right now, Owen is in the kitchen. Or I am. Or we both stand there simultaneously, hands brushing past each other while we reach for the same mug in different versions of the room. Sunlight streams in through windows that tilt differently in each of our realities, and yet the warmth on our skin is identical. The coffee tastes the same in every state. It's one of the few constants left. In my pocket, I can feel the key. The one with the red cap, or the blue, or both. It doesn't matter anymore. Any version will open the door, because the door isn't a barrier, it's a boundary between infinite layers of home, a hinge connecting realities, not dividing them. I used to think I could leave, that if I packed a bag and walked far enough in any direction, I could outrun whatever happened here. But I understand now that the apartment didn't break reality. Reality was always like this, frayed, multiplied, teeming with versions of ourselves walking the same paths just a breath out of sync. This place only tore the curtain down and made the truth impossible to ignore. We're never alone in our homes. We're never the only ones living our lives. Other selves, other choices, other timelines, they all nest together like layers of transparency stacked on glass. We pretend the boundaries are solid because it's easier that way, safer, cleaner. But the apartment showed us what lies beneath that illusion. And now Owen stands in the doorway. Or I stand there. Or maybe we both do, occupying the same place with just enough difference to keep the world from collapsing outright. He's holding his key. I'm holding mine. Two identical little objects that unlock an endless number of states. He asks, "Are you okay?" Or maybe I ask. Or maybe the question rises unbidden from both of us at once, overlapping perfectly like two voices singing the same note. We don't answer. Because how do you explain fractured identities, shifting rooms, and timelines tangled like threads in a loom? How do you answer a question that depends entirely on which version of yourself heard it? The silence stretches, and somewhere in that space, between the question and the answer, between him and me, between every reality the apartment contains, we wait to see which version of us responds first. I've started writing things down, not for reflection, not for therapy, but simply to prove to myself that time is still moving in a straight line. A journal felt like the last tool I had left to anchor my mind, but even that's slipping. Some mornings I flip back through the pages and find entries that look like I wrote them, but the handwriting leans just a little too angular or too rounded. A version of my script twisted by someone else's habits. Probably Owen's. Or maybe it belongs to a version of me that isn't this one. One page claims I slept like a rock on October 23rd. 2 pages later, the same date declares I was on the verge of collapse, planning an escape. Both memories feel true in my head. Both feel like pieces of my life. And both happen because there isn't just one me anymore. The separation between our realities has stretched so thin that it feels like the whole building has become a living organism, one that inhales slowly, exhales gently, and somehow syncs its breaths with ours. At night, when everything goes quiet, I feel the walls pulse, not figuratively, literally shifting in subtle, rhythmic expansions, as if something underneath the drywall and wooden beams has a heartbeat. A shared pulse that Owen and I seem to fall into without trying. We're tuned to it now. And I don't know if that means the building is merging with us, or if we're merging with the building. Lately, the other tenants have started acting different. Or maybe they were always like this and I just never paid attention. The woman downstairs, 2A, I've started calling her Mrs. Miller, even though I don't actually know her name. She slid a note under our door a few nights ago. 3 words, "Keep it down." Owen read it with trembling fingers. "She heard us," he whispered. "She heard both of us." But when I went to apologize the next morning, she cracked open her door with a blank, polite stare, like I was a stranger selling magazines. "What noise?" she asked. "Who are you?" Behind her, her apartment flickered. Not the lights, the reality. As the door swung wider, I saw 3 versions of her living room superimposed on each other. 3 different couches, 3 different floor plans, 3 different levels of chaos, all stacked together like translucent layers of glass. She didn't react to any of it. She didn't even blink. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a 3B problem. This wasn't even our floor problem. The entire building had slipped into some fractured state, and maybe it had been this way forever. Owen's been trying to make sense of it. His version of coping is to drown himself in research. Notebooks full of branching diagrams, theories about multiple timelines colliding, cosmic fractures, structural failures in the weave of space-time. He talks like he's moments away from cracking the answer. He tries to explain it all to me, pages full of symbols, arrows, frantic calculations, like he's building a map back to one single version of reality. I let him talk. I nod when he turns the pages. But I've seen those notebooks before. Sometimes I find them in my kitchen. Sometimes they're on his desk. Sometimes they show up with writing I swear I did myself but can't remember doing at all. The diagrams repeat in different forms, different eras of handwriting, identical ideas emerging from different versions of us. I flip through them and see his words, my words, hybrid words written by someone that is exactly either of us. I don't tell him this, because I don't think it matters anymore. The building isn't slipping. We are. And I think we both know it, even if neither of us is willing to say it aloud. The moment I realized my handwriting no longer belonged entirely to me, everything changed. It wasn't just my words on the page, it felt like another mind had slipped its fingers into mine and started writing beside me. Every entry in the journal, every sentence, every scratched out thought, it was no longer me or him. It was something in between, a merged consciousness, a hybrid, a terrifying new author neither of us could control. At first it was panic, that sharp, primal fear of losing yourself. But the real horror wasn't the fear. It was how quickly everything started feeling normal. Like the mind can bend until it forgets what straight even looked like. Some mornings I'd wake up and the double reality didn't feel like a crisis anymore. The 2 versions of the apartment, my couch and his couch, my walls and his walls, they blended together like mismatched furniture in a thrift store living room. I made coffee, or maybe he made coffee. We'd sit in our shared, not shared living room, saying nothing, because every conversation had already happened in another timeline we both remembered. Silence became the safe place. The overlap became home. Then came the morning, everything snapped. I was halfway through breakfast, sardines on crackers with hot sauce, before my brain caught up. I hate sardines. The smell alone should have made me gag, but not today. Today I was enjoying them like they were my childhood comfort food. Owen walked out of the bedroom, saw the tin, and smiled, that small, warm smile he almost never shows. "Every Saturday," he said, "my mom used to make those for me." The cracker slipped from my fingers, not from disgust, but from dread. The taste wasn't mine. The pleasure wasn't mine. I had felt his nostalgia as if it were carved into my own childhood. And after that, the invasions only got worse. I'd reach for the coffee pot and feel my entire arm glitch, like it wasn't the right arm, like it wasn't attached correctly. It took a full second to remember, I'm left-handed. I was left-handed. Owen is right-handed. His instincts were bleeding into my body, overriding my muscle memory with his. One afternoon, I caught myself humming a tune I'd never heard. A melody I could feel in my bones but could swear I'd never listened to in my life. When I looked it up, my stomach dropped. It was from a college production of Sweeney Todd Owen once talked about, but I wasn't recalling his story about it. I remembered being there. The cheap balcony seats, The bright, almost cheerful stage blood. The cold air from the vent overhead. The smell of dust and old curtains. Not his story, his memory. And in that moment, I realized something chilling. We weren't sharing memories anymore. They were becoming mine. Or worse, I was becoming him. The memories weren't the end, they were just the opening act. Soon I started feeling things I had no right to feel. Sensations that weren't mine. Emotions that didn't belong to me. Memories loaded with texture, color, and scent, all stolen from someone else. The first betrayal came through smell. I'd be sitting alone and suddenly catch a deep, woody cologne drifting through the air, the same one Owen always wore. At first, I thought it was just him brushing past in one of our overlapping timelines. But then I smelled it on my skin, on the collar of my shirt, on days when I hadn't seen him, when I hadn't stepped within 10 feet of him. I scrubbed myself raw in the shower, tearing at my skin, but the scent stayed, clung to me, seeped into me. Our chemical identities were blending, like even my body couldn't tell who it belonged to anymore. Then came the phantom pain. One evening, I watched Owen wince on the other side of the apartment, his hand flying to his temple, his face twisted in agony. And at the same time, a bolt of pain detonated inside my skull with perfect synchronization, like we were sharing the same nervous system. When he went running in the morning, I stayed home, yet my calves burned, my lungs stung, and every footfall rattled my bones. My body was living his life, his exhaustion, his injuries, his pleasures. The mirror quickly turned into an enemy. Because some days, the face staring back wasn't entirely mine. Same contours, same structure, but the expression, the subtle tilt of the eyebrows, the tension around the mouth felt foreign, like someone else was wearing me from the inside. And once, while washing dishes, I looked down and my breath froze. Those weren't my hands. The knuckles were broader. The thumb carried a scar I never had. A small mole sat on the wrong wrist. Owen's hands flickered over my own, a perfect overlay, and vanished when I blinked. But the impression stayed, an afterimage seared into reality. Our bodies were merging the way our thoughts already had. Yesterday, or maybe last week, or maybe in a reality where time still behaves, my sister called. Her name lighting up my phone felt like seeing a ghost, a reminder of a world where I was still whole, still one person, still myself. I didn't answer. Because how do you talk to someone who thinks you're still the version of you that hasn't shattered? The version that lived alone. The version that isn't sharing skin and senses with a stranger mashed into your timeline. Her voicemail sat untouched for 3 days before I found the courage to press play. Hey Lyle, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Call me back when you get a chance, okay? Love you. The normality of it cracked something in me. Her voice came from a reality where people didn't blend, where identities didn't leak, where your memories stayed yours. I wanted to call her back more than I wanted to breathe. I wanted to hear her say my name and pretend, just for a moment, that I hadn't become something unrecognizable. On a Tuesday evening, hands trembling so hard I nearly dropped the phone, I finally hit call. I stared at her name glowing on the screen like it belonged to another lifetime. When she picked up on the second ring, her voice hit me like a punch. Lyle, God, it's good to hear your voice. For a moment, I almost believed I was still that person, the brother she remembered, the one who lived cleanly inside a single timeline. Hey, Jess, I said, forcing calm into my voice. Sorry I've been out of touch. Work, been crazy. But the second I said it, I felt the world tilt under my feet. Yeah, she said lightly. I know, you told me that this morning. Everything around me froze. The refrigerator hum disappeared. The traffic noise outside collapsed into a dead, impossible silence. Even the air felt like it stopped moving. What? I asked, but it didn't sound like me. It sounded like a recording of me played just slightly off. This morning, she repeated. You called around 8. You sounded different, kind of distant. I was worried, but you sound like yourself now. I hadn't called her. I hadn't even been awake. But Owen had been, in his reality, in his morning. In his version of the day, he had picked up my phone and stepped directly into my life. Lyle, are you still there? She asked. I swallowed hard. Yeah, I'm here. My heart felt like it was beating in someone else's chest. What did I say this morning? Are you sure you're okay? She asked, quietly afraid. You really don't remember calling me? No. I remembered sleeping. I remembered waking up alone, or thinking I had. But in a parallel version of that morning, Owen had lived a different moment, a different choice, a different slice of my life. You told me about the apartment, she said, that you decided to stay, that things were strange, but you made peace with it. She hesitated. Those were your exact words. Made peace with it. The phrase slid through me like ice water. Owen had said those words to her, as me, with my voice, using my childhood nickname for her, wearing my life like a suit he could zip up whenever he needed. I closed my eyes, realizing he hadn't just crossed a boundary, he'd erased it. Jess, I said quietly, I'm fine. My voice didn't shake. Somehow that made it worse. I should go. I'll call you soon. Okay, I love you. Love you too. I hung up, then sat perfectly still, the phone warm in my hand. And in that stillness, the truth settled over me with brutal clarity. I would never call her again. Because if I didn't, she wouldn't know which version of me she was talking to. And neither would I. The merging wasn't inside the apartment anymore. It wasn't a glitch in a single room. It was bleeding outward through memories, actions, choices, and now through the people who loved me. The infection of identity was spreading across every timeline we touched. In my sister's world, she had spoken to me twice today. And she was right. She had spoken to me. Just not both times to the same me. The second call, the morning call, had been made by someone who carried my voice, my history, my affection, but who was also completely and irrevocably Owen. That was the moment the last barrier collapsed. Lyle Camden, singular, separate, whole, ceased to exist. There was no him and me. No borders. No versions. There was only we. And we were learning to live inside every overlapping space together. Owen says he hasn't spoken to his parents in 6 weeks. Or maybe I say it. Or maybe we both do at the exact same moment, with the exact same voice. Our loneliness has synchronized. Our families, once separate, once worlds apart, now feel equally distant, equally unreachable, as if the divide between us and the normal world has stretched into something cosmic. Sometimes I stand at the window and stare down at the people moving along Polk Avenue. Dogs on leashes, grocery bags swinging, arguments, laughter, phone calls, little anchors holding them inside realities that remain obediently singular. And I feel this twisted mix of envy and something like pity. They have no idea. They think they're whole, think they're oneself living one life in one timeline. But I can see it now. the way their edges ripple, the faint flickering, like their outlines are being redrawn 1,000 times per second. Everyone overlaps. Everyone exists in layers. Most just never notice the cracks. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this madness really is just our apartment. Just this cursed building. Just us. Maybe Owen and I are special, chosen in the worst possible way. Two men blessed with perception or cursed with shared delusion, falling apart in perfect, horrifying harmony. Either way, the distinction barely matters anymore. Last night or this morning, or in some time that doesn't belong on any human calendar, I had a dream. Except it wasn't me dreaming about Owen. It was me dreaming as Owen. I lived inside his childhood in Sacramento. Felt the sun through the kitchen windows of his first apartment. Saw the face of the girlfriend who left him because he micromanaged the way she stacked the plates. And I felt his panic, that clawing, suffocating anxiety that demands order at any cost. For the first time, I understood why he'd reorganized my books, why my clutter physically hurt him. When I woke up, I couldn't untangle anything. Denver or Sacramento, my ex or his, my memories or ours. They'd fused into a single timeline that never truly happened, but somehow completely did. Over coffee, I told him everything. He didn't even flinch. "I've been dreaming your life too," he said quietly. "Your sister, your childhood, that time you broke your arm falling off the swing set." My blood went cold. I hadn't told him that. Not once. Not ever. "We're merging," he said. Not a question. A diagnosis. And for the first time, I didn't deny it. Because I could feel it. The last little islands of individuality breaking apart under a rising tide. "How long until there's no difference between us?" he asked. I opened my mouth. No sound came out. Because the truth was simple and terrifying. It might already be too late. The apartment feels it too. Changes are happening faster than they used to. Walls swelling like organs, shrinking like lungs. A door opening into a room that didn't exist yesterday. A second bathroom that neither of us remembers installing. Hallways bending in places hallways shouldn't bend. Reality isn't just shifting. It's accelerating. And we're losing the race to stay ourselves. Neither of us remembers buying the furniture in that new storage closet. Yet every time we open the door, something in our chest aches with recognition, like nostalgia for a life we never lived. The apartment rearranges itself constantly, shifting like a Rubik's Cube trying to solve us instead of the other way around. We don't fight it anymore. If the kitchen swaps places with the bedroom, fine. If the front door opens into a hallway we swear isn't on any blueprint, we walk it until the building shows mercy and gives us something familiar. In Gus's office, that cursed room appears only when we aren't looking for it. Sometimes on the way to the elevator, I catch movement inside, papers rustling, a silhouette leaning over the desk. I look again, door locked. Lights off. Silent, as if the room inhaled and hid itself. Once, only once, I got a clear look inside. The figure at the desk looked like Gus. And like me. And like Owen. All at once. A merged future version of us, wearing the shape of a building manager who was never managing anything except the slow erosion of our identities. I haven't told Owen. Or maybe I did, and he told me. Or maybe both versions of us saw it, and silently agreed to bury the truth. The rules we wrote weeks ago still hang on the fridge, clinging weakly under the California flag magnet. But the words are dissolving, smearing, fading, as if the apartment itself refuses to let rules exist here. The paper sags like a memorial, a gravestone for the last version of us who believed identity was something you could protect. Sometimes I miss that man, that scared, stubborn, singular version of Lyle Camden, but not enough to fight for him. And anyway, I don't think going back is even possible. When I step outside now, the world feels distant, muted, like I'm walking through a fading photograph. Every minute away from the apartment feels wrong, like I've left half my soul behind. By the time I reach the corner store, something inside me is pulling violently, begging me to return. Owen feels it too. He tried to move out last week. Boxes packed. Moving company hired. A last desperate attempt at escape. But when the movers arrived, reality itself refused to cooperate. The building's directory showed the third floor as 3A and 3C. 3B didn't exist. No matter how long they searched, no matter which hallway they walked, apartment 3B simply wasn't there. Not for them. But we could feel it, the apartment holding its breath, clinging to us like a jealous organism. It wasn't just a place anymore. It was claiming us. The movers walked right past our door without even pausing. They didn't see anything unusual. They didn't see him. Owen stood on the other side, motionless, watching them through the peephole while occupying some overlapping version of the space they couldn't perceive. When they finally left, he unpacked in slow, deliberate movements, putting his clothes back into closets that might not exist tomorrow, arranging objects that could vanish the moment another timeline slipped over ours. Neither of us mentioned it. We don't talk about these moments anymore. Instead, we've fallen into patterns that feel rehearsed even though we've never discussed them. Every morning, one of us, or both, makes coffee. We sit together on the couch, phones in our hands or forgotten beside us, sometimes just staring into nothing, existing side by side or layered inside each other. Evenings work the same way. We cook, sometimes separately, sometimes together, almost like one organism coordinating its limbs without effort. Our rhythms are merging, our habits overlapping. A home shared by multiple selves, or one self stretched across multiple realities. Even the coffee tastes different now. Not better, just deeper. As if his preferences and mine have blended into a new flavor neither of us would have chosen alone, yet somehow suits us both. Time has become unreliable, almost mocking. My phone will tell me it's October, then seconds later insist it's December, or November. Then back to October. Outside the window, seasons come and go without order. One day it's pouring rain, the next it's blistering heat, and sometimes it's that strange, barely there San Diego autumn that never really arrives. I'm convinced each weather shift belongs to a different version of the year, all stacked on top of each other like transparent slides. I can't remember the last time I paid rent. Or maybe I paid it this morning in some branch of reality. The building doesn't seem to care. Bills either stop appearing entirely, or show up addressed to strangers, or appear in pairs demanding two different amounts. I throw them all in a drawer and close it. Owen says his bank account has started acting the same way. Huge balances one day, negative the next. It makes no difference. Money only works in a world where people exist in one place at one time. That rule doesn't apply to us anymore. We've slipped past those boundaries, past systems, past expectations, past whatever tether holds most people to linear life. Mrs. Miller left another note, just 2 words scrawled in trembling handwriting. "You're spreading." When I knocked to ask what she meant, she didn't answer, but I heard them through the door, multiple televisions, layered voices, overlapping versions of her living parallel lives inside that one apartment. She's caught in it too, maybe deeper than we are. Maybe she's eroding, becoming too scattered to pretend she can function in the singular world. And now I can't tell if the building is changing around us, or if we are changing and dragging the building along, or if it was always like this, and we're only now able to see its true shape. All 3 possibilities feel equally real. I've stopped trying to choose between them. At night, the walls carry more than silence. I hear the other tenants, or the shadows of them, moving through their lives. Not just Owen, though his presence hums constantly at the edge of my awareness, the way a heartbeat does. I can't tell anymore if he's in the same room, the next one over, or drifting through some adjacent version of the apartment. But others bleed through too. Conversations, footsteps, someone crying. Lives brushing up against ours the way timelines brush against each other. Soft at first, then unmistakably. Sometimes the voices echo my own. Sometimes they echo his. Sometimes there's something in between, a perfect blend of the 2 of us, speaking words neither of us would choose alone. I can't tell if the building is turning everyone into us, or if we're dissolving into everyone else. Maybe there was never a real distinction to begin with. Maybe individuality was just a comforting illusion, a story we crafted so we wouldn't have to confront how porous we really are. Maybe the building just stopped hiding the truth. Water runs in the bathroom. Someone brushes their teeth. It might be Owen. It might be me. It might be both. These tiny sounds of a normal life float around the apartment like they belong to any time of day or night. A morning, an evening, a Wednesday, or a day that doesn't exist in any calendar humans ever used. You'd think I'd be terrified, and some part of me still is. The last thread of Lyle Camden, who remembers what it felt like to be a single consciousness trapped neatly inside one body. That part of me claws and screams sometimes. Wordless but desperate, trying to reclaim boundaries that dissolved a long time ago. But its voice fades a little more every day, swallowed by the larger chorus that's replacing it. The key sits on the counter, the one with the red cap, or the blue cap, or both. I could leave. I could walk outside, find a new place, pretend none of this ever happened. But where would I go? And which version of me would make that choice? Could I survive the absence of Owen, this presence that's become as necessary as breath or blood? How do you cut away half your mind and expect the rest to remain intact? The water shuts off. Owen steps out, or I step out, clean, ready for whatever time we've slipped into now. We look at each other, or at the reflection of our merged selves, and something passes between us. Understanding or surrender, or maybe a quiet kind of peace. "Coffee?" one of us asks. "Yes," the other replies. We move together toward the kitchen. 2 men sharing one space. One man existing in several. And somewhere in the overlap, somewhere between these shifting identities, is the truth of what we've become. The apartment holds us, and we hold each other. And none of these boundaries are solid anymore. Not the walls, not the identities, not the realities. Only the connection remains, blurring, spreading, folding in on itself. And strangely, that feels enough. Outside, San Diego hums along, steady and unaware, its streets lined with sunlight and routine. Inside, our world fractures, folds, multiplies. Time here stretches and compresses like a lung, inhaling and exhaling realities we are only beginning to comprehend. This apartment, this impossible overlap of selves and spaces, is home now. And somehow we are learning to exist within it, all of us, all at once. The coffee steams in its pot. The day, or what passes for one, unfurls before us. Owen perches on the couch, or I do, or we do together, reading the same pages with eyes that remember different stories. The key rests on the counter. The door leads somewhere. And here we remain, tangled versions of ourselves, irreconcilable and yet inseparable, living in the strange gravity of this shared reality. Story 2, the 3 days we don't speak about. The footage would later be dissected frame by analysts in government offices who believed patterns could explain anything. But the truth is simpler. Whatever happened in White Peak Valley didn't begin with something they could see. And it didn't end in a way anyone could understand. Explanations are luxuries reserved for the living, not for the ones who never made it back. K.H. Lowe Garrison had spent nearly a year sculpting the valley into a place that would pull her guests exactly where she wanted them. It was preparation bordering on obsession. Hidden cameras wedged into crevices so carefully that even seasoned hikers wouldn't think to look. Trails nudged a few feet this way or that, as though nature itself had changed its mind. Piles of stones, rebuilt and repositioned, creating invisible channels that would guide 5 specific people into the heart of a place they had forgotten. She set up every camera to feed into a single relay concealed inside a hollow birch tree, nearly the length of 3 football fields from the camp. Every breadcrumb of equipment had been planned, tested, retested. 11 months of engineering disguised as wilderness. Just after midday on Thursday, K.H. Lowe watched the first vehicle crawl into the valley through the glass of a spotting scope she'd taken from her brother's closet after he died. Liam had saved for that scope for 2 long summers, washing dishes, taking odd jobs, marking catalog pages with hopeful notes about lens clarity and magnification. It had still been in its box the day she found it, untouched, unused, preserved like an artifact of a life interrupted. 2 cars wound their way up the trail. Fletcher Dunn's Jeep led the way. He drove with the stiff-backed confidence of a man who had never lost control of anything that mattered to him. In the passenger seat sat Veronica Shaw, her once soft hair now trimmed into the sharp, no-nonsense cut of a prosecutor who spent her days dissecting lies for a living. Behind them followed Lauren Kemp, Nathan Valdez, and Diane Ostro. The 5 of them moved with the quiet ease of people accustomed to success, comfortable, polished, certain of their place in the world. And why wouldn't they be? The past 10 years had been generous to them. Fletcher, now a partner at a prestigious law firm. Veronica, famous in legal circles for a conviction streak that intimidated even seasoned criminals. Nathan, teaching behavioral economics to Ivy League prodigies. Diane, selling best-selling novels under a pen name that teenagers worshipped. Lauren, living in a mansion with more bedrooms than people, married to a surgeon whose schedule was booked 2 years out. K.H. Lowe had tracked every milestone, every achievement, every moment of their prosperity with clinical precision, as though cataloging a species that had once been familiar but was now something altogether alien. Meanwhile, her brother Liam Garrison had lain broken in a ravine, cold and alone, until hikers stumbled upon his body 4 days later. The autopsy listed his injuries in neat medical bullet points: shattered skull, snapped spine, organs bruised beyond repair. They estimated he had fallen roughly 140 feet. His toxicology was clean. His death was ruled accidental. Case closed. But K.H. Lowe had never closed it. Lowering the scope, she reached for the small notebook at her side and wrote the time. 14:23. The moment everything began. All 5 of them were finally inside the valley. K.H. Lowe wrote it down in the same kind of notebook her brother used to carry everywhere. Grid paper, soft cover, elastic strap. Something about the familiar texture steadied her hands. Her handwriting had shrunk over the past year, tightening into a rigid script that filled page after page with observations no one was ever meant to read. The campsite looked exactly as it had the last time Liam saw it. She had studied their old photos with the intensity of someone rebuilding a vanished civilization. Every fire ring stone, every tent platform, even the fallen log where they once sat smiling. Liam blurry at the edge with that hesitant grin. Last winter, she'd burned that photograph in her kitchen sink, watched his face wrinkle, darken, and fold into ash. That was the moment she began the real work. The sun slipped behind Wickham Ridge at 5:34 p.m. She'd calculated the earlier shadow line months ago, noting how the ridge stole the light 17 minutes before the valley floor lost it. She knew exactly where darkness would fall and how it would move. Night wasn't her enemy, it was her partner. At 7:45, she activated the first move. A tiny click echoed from a hollow oak near their camp, the disguised speaker she'd hidden inside its trunk. From the darkness came a familiar sound, their own voices, recorded the night before over dinner at a nearby restaurant. She had planted a directional mic inside a potted fern by their table, the noise of diners masking the faint digital capture. Now those same voices drifted through the valley, clear and intimate. Fletcher's voice started. "Hard to believe it's been 10 years. Veronica answered, a tinge of annoyance in her tone. "Do you think his sister actually wants a memorial? Or is this just guilt dressed up as grief?" A burst of laughter. Then Nathan. "K.H. Lowe isn't dangerous. Let her do her closure thing. We'll be gone by Sunday." Then silence. At the campfire, heads snapped toward the trees. Confusion hardened into tension. Fletcher marched toward the speaker with his flashlight, scanning the oak bark. He didn't see the device, painted in perfect bark pattern, bolted 12 feet high. K.H. Lowe watched from her blind, nodding every reaction with an expressionless calm. She had 17 more recordings queued, arranged like psychological dominoes, each one placed to weaken trust, amplify suspicion, and pry open old fractures. It wasn't magic. It wasn't even complicated. Humans fill in blanks with fear if you leave them alone long enough. At 11:12, she triggered the second recording. This one was a voice none of them had heard in a decade. Liam, extracted from an old college video, cleaned digitally so his words cut through the night like a blade. "Why are you doing this?" The reaction was instant. Lauren screamed so loudly the microphone clipped. Diane jolted to her feet, knocking over her chair. Even Fletcher, steady, controlled Fletcher, lost the color in his face. K.H. Lowe wrote another line in her notebook. Second sequence, predictable distress, responses within expected range. Still she felt nothing. No flicker of triumph. Just the cold precision of someone adjusting dials on an experiment. The FBI would one day call her emotional stillness significant. But by the time K.H. Lowe executed this plan, rage had burnt out long ago. What remained wasn't anger. It was clarity sharpened to a surgical edge. She found Liam's journal in March, tucked inside a box of old textbooks her mother wanted to donate. page after page of painfully detailed observations. Liam had always noticed everything: plants, insects, people, especially people. He documented the jokes at his expense, the voices mocking the stutter he no longer had, Fletcher's cruel impressions, Veronica's knowing silence, Nathan's cold amusement, the girls shrinking into quiet complicity. The entries were controlled at first, clinical analysis of social hostility. Then the writing frayed, the lines slanted, the sentences unraveling into panic. She remembered how fiercely loyal Liam had always been, loyal to a fault. In high school, when someone humiliated K.H. Lowe, Liam followed the boy home and watched from across the street for an hour. She never knew what happened during that silent vigil, but the boy switched schools 2 weeks later. The last journal entry was dated the morning he died. They won't stop. Fletcher keeps pushing. He makes everyone laugh when he does the stutter voice. I don't even stutter anymore. Veronica pretends not to hear, but that's worse. Nathan studies us like we're his experiment. The girls just go quiet. It feels like drowning in plain sight. I'm going to show them. I'm doing the cliff traverse. They think I'm too scared. They'll see. That's where the writing ended. At 2:00 p.m. that afternoon, Liam fell. And 10 years later, in the same valley, the people who pushed him there were finally hearing his voice again. The fog pressed down like a living thing, dense enough to swallow the valley whole. Visibility shrank to barely 15 feet, and Chloe moved through it like a shadow with intent. She had traced this ground in her mind a dozen times, memorizing every brittle branch that might betray her step, every cluster of leaves that could betray movement. Her moccasins absorbed sound, her motions deliberate, patient, the kind of patience that only comes from obsessive preparation. Inside the tents, the campers remained blissfully unaware. Diane, Fletcher, Nathan, Lauren, Veronica, they were all lost in their morning routines, still cocooned in the illusion of safety. Chloe's hands were steady as she executed her plan. Diane's insulin was swapped with a saline replica, indistinguishable even to the trained eye. Fletcher's camp stove fuel line was loosened just enough to trickle, imperceptible but ominous. Nathan's satellite phone sat inert with dead batteries, a small trap lying in wait. Each act measured, subtle, seemingly harmless, but cumulatively it was pressure, a slow tightening of invisible threads. The fog lingered, embracing the valley as Chloe moved to the final stage. She had spent months crafting the effigies, 5 crude figures fashioned from stripped willow and decorated with tokens she had painstakingly collected. A button lifted from Fletcher's coat during a fleeting encounter, a hair tie stolen from Veronica, a bookmark filched from Diane's office. Each item was a whisper of their lives, a marker that made the effigies unnervingly personal. She arranged them in a semicircle, facing the camp, suspended at eye level like silent sentinels waiting for discovery. By 9:47, the first scream split the fog. Lauren stumbled onto her effigy, a shriek tearing from her throat so sharp it sent a flock of nearby birds scattering into the gray sky. Panic spread instantly, rippling through the camp as each person encountered their own figure. The effigies swayed gently, turning in the morning breeze, their human-like forms impossibly familiar and grotesque. There was no magic, no trickery beyond the meticulous layering of preparation and observation, but the effect was absolute. Chloe's eyes behind the lenses of her scope absorbed it all with surgical calm. Heartbeats raced across the campfire glow, shadows leaping over startled faces. She noted reactions in the margins of her notebook, subtle tremors, involuntary flinches, the tightening of hands around coffee mugs. This wasn't satisfaction, it was data. She had gone past emotion, past vengeance. What she felt now was clarity, a cold, precise focus that allowed her to manipulate and observe, to understand without being swept away by anger or grief. Her preparation had begun the moment she found Liam's journal. 11 readings later, every detail etched in her mind, every slight injustice catalogued, every instance of cruelty measured. The journal was more than memory. It was a blueprint. She knew the exact timing, the exact responses, the exact vulnerabilities. And now, with fog as her cover and the valley as her stage, the actors had arrived, playing unwitting roles in the story she had written long before their arrival. The effigies rotated slowly in the mist, grotesque, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Each one a fragment of memory, a fragment of pain, a fragment of life twisted into something intimate and unsettling. And Chloe, hidden in the gray silence, watched it unfold like a predator admiring the symmetry of its design, cold, detached, and utterly, terrifyingly in control. The fog thickened into a suffocating veil as Chloe observed from her hidden vantage, unseen and silent. Shadows twisted between the trees while the 5 campers converged near the fire, voices rising in a chaotic symphony of accusation, denial, and suspicion. Chloe had predicted this fracture. Trust would splinter here, suspicion bloom like poison. Fletcher's voice lashed at Nathan, accusing him of a cruel joke. Nathan spun, finger pointed at Veronica. Diane's quiet sobs ignited Lauren's anger, sharp and raw. In less than half an hour, the group's cohesion had evaporated. 5 individuals now isolated in fear, each tethered only to their own terror. The animal mind, when pushed, reveals itself with horrifying clarity, instinct and vulnerability exposed. Chloe had studied this in human behavior as hunters study prey. Predictable, inevitable, irresistible. At exactly 14:00, the hour etched into history as the moment Liam died, she activated the 3rd sequence. A recording floated through the mist, crafted from countless snippets of Liam's voice, stitched together with ruthless precision. He spoke from memory, reading journal entries that cataloged every slight, every subtle cruelty they had inflicted, every moment they had laughed at his expense. The final line lingered in the air. "Why are you doing this?" Chaos erupted. Fletcher lunged toward the trees, searching for the source. Veronica suggested abandoning camp, retreating into the forest's embrace. Nathan argued to stay, convinced it was some elaborate trick, some orchestrated prank. Diane went pale, silent, eyes wide. Lauren trembled, voice caught in a throat tightened by fear. Despite the dread, they stayed. Chloe's smile was invisible behind the lens. She had counted on it. Fear of the unknown outweighed the impulse to flee, because leaving would acknowledge guilt, confront the truth of their cruelty. Shame was her ultimate trap, sharper than any blade. Night fell like a curtain, bringing rain and precision. At 22:00, she struck again. Tiny, invisible incisions along the seams of their tents, so precise they could be mistaken for manufacturing flaws. When the rain began at 23:30, relentless and icy, the shelters collapsed, folding like paper. The campers scrambled, drenched, seeking refuge in Fletcher's Jeep. 5 adults jammed into a space meant for none of them. Their weekend of leisure had transformed into an unrelenting crucible of fear. By 2:15, while exhaustion claimed them in fragmented slumber, Chloe moved once more. Photographs from that final trip a decade earlier, carefully enlarged, digitally altered, were placed in the shadows around the camp. Liam's face had been removed, leaving empty spaces where memory should have lived, an absence that made the past feel as hollow and unstable as the present. Each image hung in silent accusation, a reminder that absence could scream louder than presence. The valley seemed to hold its breath, fog curling around the trees as Chloe watched. every calculated step unfolding with terrifying inevitability. The altered photographs were more than unsettling. They were wrong in a way that bypassed logic and struck directly at the primitive parts of the mind. The spacing between the figures felt distorted. The balance of each image was subtly off. It was as if the viewer's brain recognized an absence but couldn't name it, leaving only a rising sense of dread that crawled beneath the skin. Chloe had tested this effect on herself, staring at the edits for hours, studying the unease they produced. It was exactly what she needed. Before dawn, she fastened these photos along a narrow path leading straight toward Widow's Ledge, the sheer cliff where Liam's life had ended. By the time sunlight crept into the valley, the survivors emerged from the jeep, shivering and exhausted, only to stumble upon the first picture. Then the next, and the next. Veronica doubled over and vomited in the dirt. Fletcher's flashlight slipped from his shaking hand and clattered against the rocks. Nathan made a thin, animal sound, high and broken, like the moment a mind begins to split under pressure. Diane stared at the images with hollow eyes until she whispered the fear blooming in all their minds. He knows, somehow he knows. He's dead, Fletcher answered, but even he didn't seem to believe his own words. Then who's doing this? Lauren demanded, voice trembling. Who else would know? Who else would care? Their question lingered in the cold morning air, heavy, suffocating, accusatory. From her position 200 yards away, Chloe watched the exact moment suspicion detonated between them. If not Liam returned from the grave, then one of them. The paranoia she had been cultivating for months finally took root, dark and blooming. At 8:00, they tried to flee. Fletcher jammed his key into the Jeep's ignition. The engine didn't even cough. The distributor cap she'd removed in the night left the truck as lifeless as Liam on the rocks below Widow's Ledge. Nathan's SUV gave them a few desperate seconds of hope, then sputtered, choked, and died after 50 yards as the fuel line she pinched starved the engine. They were stranded. The forest became a silent witness as fear devoured their logic. Hiking out was possible, but it meant abandoning supplies, risking exposure, and forcing Diane into a brutal 12-hour trek. She clutched her kit clothes, unaware the insulin she depended on had already been swapped for sterile saline. She had been injecting salt water into her bloodstream for almost a full day. Chloe watched as they debated their next move, watched them talk themselves deeper into the snare she'd woven. They chose to stay. One more night, one more attempt at repairs, one more chance for panic to do her work. Every decision they made tightened the noose. At 15:00, she let Liam's voice spill into the valley again. But this recording was unlike the others. It was raw, painful, stitched from moments none of them knew Chloe had access to. Clips taken from a camera they believed destroyed after Liam's death. Footage Nathan had tried to erase forever, tossed in a box and dumped at an e-waste center. Chloe had hired professionals to recover it months ago. Now, Liam's voice rose through the trees, cracked with fear as he begged them to stop pushing him, to stop laughing, to stop turning his life into a game he couldn't win. And for the first time since they arrived, the forest fell completely silent, as if even the wind paused to listen. The recording started quietly at first, a whisper through the trees, but the effect was instantaneous. Liam's voice trembled, raw and fractured, each syllable a desperate plea. "I can't, the edge, it's wrong, I can't." The stutter returned, hesitant and broken, echoing every mockery he had endured at Fletcher's hands. Overlaying it, laughter cut through the fog, the sharp, cruel laughter of friends who never recognized the damage they'd done. Fletcher's voice rang clear. "Come on, Liam, just climb it." Veronica's words followed, cold and absolute. "If you don't, we're done. Completely done." The recording ended just before the fall. Not the scream, not the impact. Only the desperate human terror, the sharp punctuation of silence that followed. Chloe watched through her scope as their faces drained of color, cataloging the exact moment their carefully constructed stories of innocence and accident disintegrated. They had told themselves Liam's death was tragic but fair, a misstep, a risk poorly judged. Now that illusion shattered, leaving only a raw, unanswerable truth. Nathan was the first to break. He bolted into the forest, branches slapping his face as he ran blindly for escape. Fletcher shouted after him, futile and frantic. Veronica collapsed to her knees, hands gripping the dirt, eyes wide and uncomprehending. Diane's breaths came in rapid, shallow bursts, panic clawing at her chest. Lauren froze, unmoving, her shock so absolute it carved stillness from the chaos. Chloe scribbled her notes with mechanical precision. Subjects exhibiting extreme psychological collapse. Final phase pending. The day weighed down the valley like a living thing. The vehicles were abandoned, the trail out impossible with Diane's deteriorating condition, and comprehension of the tormentor had long since become irrelevant. Her body weak from saline injections masquerading as insulin, Diane's mind wandered in confusion. She slurred, stumbled, and grasped at nothing, while the others tried in vain to mitigate the crisis with supplies that couldn't correct the fundamental truth. Chloe had the power to intervene, to reveal herself, to provide life-saving aid, but she remained a ghost in the trees, observing. Liam had fallen 140 feet. He hadn't died instantly. Autopsy reports suggested he lingered, half an hour alone, shattered and helpless. 30 minutes of silent suffering, an eternity of waiting. Chloe could wait as long as she needed. By 21:00, Diane was unresponsive. By 21:30, she stopped breathing. Fletcher's hands worked with trained precision, chest compressions textbook perfect. But perfection could not overcome the deliberate cruelty of circumstance. At 21:47, she was gone. Death recorded clinically. Diabetic ketoacidosis, oxygen-starved brain, a tragedy compounded by delayed understanding and unprepared care. Chloe noted every detail without a flicker of sentiment. The absence of emotion was itself data. The remaining four fragmented instantly. Nathan accused Fletcher of sabotage. Fletcher turned on Veronica, screaming that she had goaded Liam into the fatal climb. Veronica laughed, shrill and unhinged, declaring they were all guilty. There was no limit to this guilt. It stretched, infinite and oppressive, infecting them all. Lauren fled, flashlight in hand, crashing blindly into the undergrowth. Chloe tracked her through the scope as the forest swallowed her. She ran roughly 200 yards before a misstep twisted her ankle against uneven roots and stone. Her scream tore across the valley before she collapsed, immobile. 3 remained, Fletcher, Veronica, and Nathan. They gathered near Diane's body, a silent trio where language had no purchase, where words could no longer bridge understanding. At 3:00 a.m., Chloe activated the final message. Liam's voice, synthesized from recordings, called them. "Come to the ledge, come at dawn, we'll finish this." She watched as each processed the command, the decision pressing down. To obey meant facing terror, but to refuse meant staying with death, chaos, and irreparable guilt. Dawn arrived at 5:47. Chloe was waiting at Widow's Ledge, the exact spot where Liam had stood. Coordinates plotted with precision, cross-referenced against every investigative image. The first figure appeared, Fletcher, eyes wide, the weight of understanding heavy in his steps. Veronica followed, hesitation laced with dread. Nathan came last, body taut with fear and disbelief. They reached the cliff and saw her waiting, watching them reconcile legend with human reality. "You," Fletcher breathed, voice a mixture of recognition, relief, and something darker. An acknowledgement that vengeance could be human, that closure could come without ghosts, that what they had feared most was themselves, finally revealed. K.H. Lowe stood at the cliff's edge, the cold wind slicing through the dawn mist, a journal clutched in her hands like a talisman. She had rehearsed this confrontation countless times, imagined every word, every reaction, every tremor of their guilt. But now, with the three people responsible for Liam's death before her, all her prepared lines felt hollow. She didn't speak first. She let the silence stretch, heavy and charged, until it demanded attention. "This," she said finally, holding up the journal, "records everything." Her tone was quiet, deceptively calm, almost casual, but every word carried the weight of 10 years. Every insult, every cruelty, every moment you thought he wouldn't remember. He observed it all like a scientist documenting an experiment. Veronica's face drained of color. "Chloe, we never meant." "You meant exactly what you did," K.H. Lowe cut in, her voice sharp and unflinching. "You chose mockery because it was easier than kindness. You chose cruelty because it made you feel safe, superior. You pushed him to climb that cliff because his fear entertained you." Fletcher stepped forward, hands open, pleading. "We were kids. We made mistakes. We've lived with the guilt. Don't you understand?" K.H. Lowe's eyes didn't waver. "You've thrived. Built your lives on the ruins of his, on your silence. That's your legacy." Nathan's laugh was half sob, fractured and ragged. "What do you want? What's the point?" "The point," K.H. Lowe said, "is that someone needed to remember him properly. You remember a boy who failed. I remember my brother, murdered slowly, methodically, by your hands over months." Fletcher's voice dropped. "We didn't murder him, he fell. It was an accident." "The fall," K.H. Lowe replied, "was the final act. But the months before, that's where the real damage was done. Like water wearing down stone, relentless, invisible, inevitable." She had pictured their confessions, imagined tears, apologies, the collapse of their carefully curated facades. Instead, Fletcher's lips curved into a cold, controlled smile. "So what now?" he asked. "You've killed, terrorized, destroyed. What happens next?" "I think," K.H. Lowe said slowly, "you live with it, just as I'll live with what I've done." "That's never enough," Veronica whispered. "No," K.H. Lowe agreed. "It's never enough." Nathan's voice emerged, flat and distant. "You should know the truth." Fletcher snapped, "Nathan, shut up." But Nathan didn't stop. He looked at K.H. Lowe with a strange pity before the words tumbled out. "The journal, it didn't tell everything. Did you know he had a knife?" The ground seemed to shift beneath her certainty. "What are you saying?" she asked, voice steady though her pulse raced. Fletcher nodded, hollow now, no trace of that earlier smirk. "Tell her." Nathan's words were fractured, hesitant at first. We saw him sharpening it for weeks in his tent. We didn't know what he was planning." "You're lying," K.H. Lowe said. But the conviction was missing, replaced by the raw edge of disbelief. Veronica's voice broke. We didn't know. We were scared. He wouldn't talk to us. Just that knife, always the knife." Fletcher's confession cut through the remnants of excuses. "We didn't push him to climb out of cruelty. We needed him away from the knife. We thought if he kept moving, we could survive the day. We thought maybe he'd planned something. But when the struggle happened, he lost his grip. I tried to hold him. It was self-defense." Nathan's voice trembled as the final pieces fell into place. "He wanted us to feel real fear. He said, 'It's my turn.' That's what he said." K.H. Lowe's hand shook as the weight of the journal pressed against her palm. The sun rose, burning away the mist over Widow's Ledge, illuminating the cliff with stark, unflinching clarity. She looked at the three people before her, damaged, terrified, broken by a decade of secrets. She thought of the effigies, the recordings, the saline in Diane's vial, the chaos she had orchestrated, the boy sharpening his knife. "I don't believe you," she said. Nathan hesitated, then reached into his jacket and dropped a small, plastic-wrapped package at her feet. "We kept it," he said. "We couldn't throw it away, couldn't turn it in, just kept it." Inside was a folding knife, the handle worn, the blade familiar. K.H. Lowe recognized it instantly, Liam's. The steel still bore the stains of that final struggle. She held the knife, the journal, the crumbling certainty of her narrative. 11 months of planning, meticulous precision had brought her to this moment. She had hunted for justice, and in doing so, had hunted the wrong story. "You made us relive it," Veronica said softly. "Every detail, every fear. You made us see what we did and what he did. You got revenge, but not for what you thought." K.H. Lowe looked at the knife in her hand, the journal open before her, the 3 survivors at her feet. The FBI would later classify her actions, analyze the meticulous planning, the emotional detachment, the refusal to accept contrary truths. But she understood perfectly. Truth is a construct. Memory is fragile. Justice is what we choose it to be. She had loved Liam fiercely, beyond evidence, beyond reason. And that love had shaped her into something unrecognizable, something beyond vengeance, a hunter who had outpaced her own humanity. The final trail camera captured her at 8:15 a.m., walking from Widow's Ledge with deliberate, unhurried steps. Calm, clean, vanishing into the wilderness, leaving behind the ruins of vengeance, grief, and memory. In the image, the coordinates and timestamp were precise, and if you looked closely, her face was utterly, terrifyingly serene.